Welcome to the Beyond the Reef podcast, where I talk to experts and researchers in the reef aquarium hobby, discussing a broad range of topics from corals and reef biology to water chemistry and equipment. We take a deep dive into our guests' methods, techniques, and top reef keeping tips. My name is Adam Sutherland, and I am the owner-operator of Frag Garage Corals, based out of British Columbia, Canada. This podcast is now brought to you by Fauna Marine. I was hesitant to bring on any sponsors, but since I use so many Fauna Marine products, I was really happy to have them collaborate with me. And also, I am now a certified ICP consultant, so if you send in a laboratory ICP test, you can select me as an advisor. Hey folks, welcome to another episode. Today I'm joined by Dr. Andy Bouwma. He is a professor at Oregon State University, educator of sciences, very passionate reef hobbyist, and I really wanted to get him on the show. We've chatted a little bit before, but we haven't really had a long-form conversation like this. And Andy's been kind of like the guinea pig for Aquabionics. And if you're not familiar with Aquabionics, we are going to get into it in this conversation, but it is basically a breakdown of the bacterial communities in your aquarium water and on your surfaces. And basically, Andy sent many tests over a long period of time, making changes and seeing how those changes were reflected based on what he was seeing in the tests. We also took a close look at Andy's mixed reef and how he runs that system, his lighting, some of his equipment, some of his tips for getting everything to get along in a mixed system. As per usual, please hit that subscribe button, like, share, comment in the comments, and I'd like to thank anybody that is on my Patreon. Even the smallest membership really helps, but if you're looking for the top tier and you want consultation services, you can do monthly consultations with me for either ICP analysis or really just troubleshooting any problem that you have, and I'm happy to help. So anyways, I hope you enjoy this episode with Andy Bouwma. I'm actually just going to say that we're re-recording the beginning half of this episode because we just wanted to make a few changes. And so welcome back, and welcome for the first time, I guess, at the same time.
Thanks, Adam. Good to see you again.
Yeah. We wanted to talk about Aquabionics, and you are a user that has, really had a deep dive into the services, and you've seen a lot of how that impacts your system. I thought we could kind of start by talking about that, and you could sort of break down kind of what Aquabionics is. You're obviously pretty good buds with Eli, who's the owner operator of that business. So maybe just take us through, your journey with that.
Yeah, sure thing. I think I have the distinction of having the most tested tank, perhaps, in the world for the microbiome. I have my display tank has been out for about 5 years, and I set it up, right around the time that Eli started up this new service. And so I've been testing pretty regularly as the tank developed, which has allowed me to have all kinds of interesting insights into how a tank develops, goes through the uglies, and it matures. Yeah. So I guess I could first say, what kind of data you get back with an Aquabionics report. So what you do, anybody can go to aquabionics.com and watch the little video about how to sample your tank. You basically get some water from the tank, and you filter it through a little filter that collects the DNA from the water. You preserve that in a small bit of ethanol, and then you send it back to Eli. You also do a small sample of the biofilm on the inside of a pipe of your tank. Mm-hmm. And so that gives you a sample of the surfaces and also of the water column.
Okay, so are there two entire readouts then? There's the water column water and the surface sample?
Yeah, that's a good question. So they're combined for some things, mm-hmm. but the graphical display that you get back, it comes from that water sample. Mm-hmm. And so so Eli does these tests in batches. So he has to get enough samples together to send them off to the sequencing facility. And so every 2 weeks he sends off another batch. And just a side note, his volume is going up. Every year his volume is going up. So he's almost to the point where he can do 3 batches a month. And when he does that, that'll cut the turnaround time significantly.
Okay, that's kind of the opposite of what some businesses would be, because they're getting too busy now. Everything's going to slow down, but it actually makes it more efficient for him to send it off more
It
often.
does, yeah.
Yeah, so it's another reason for people to do it more on a regular basis too, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's a thing with DNA sequencing where they'll do like 50 of them and that at a time, and it's the same price whether you do 1 or 50, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense for Eli to collect as many samples till he gets 50 and then send it off. And so obviously, if you can do that more often, it speeds the whole process up. So it takes somewhere between 2 weeks and a month to get your results back because of needing to send it into the sequencing facility every couple weeks. And so once you get your sample back, you get a report that has a graphical representation. And I sent you a graph.
Yeah, I'll put it up here.
Yeah. And you can see basically all of the families in different colors that make up at least 1% of the community from that water sample. Mm-hmm. And so a typical mature community looks like the one that we're looking at now, that has a big band of pink. And that pink band is the Pelagibacteriaceae. Mm-hmm. And we'll return to that in a bit. But that's a key characteristic of a mature community. And so along with that visual representation, you get a couple bits of data. So you get a diversity score, which is just the total number of different microbes that are in your sample. And so it's basically, the total number of different strains of bacteria that are in your sample. So that's the diversity score. And then you get a balance score. And that's the correlation of your community to the typical mature, healthy reef microbiome. Mm-hmm. And that's a composite community that Eli has developed from the 2,000 plus samples in his database.
Okay, so the typical sample is, sorry to stop you for a second. The typical sample it's an average of the sort of best healthy systems. It's not like a natural seawater comparison. It's a closed environment. Yeah, because if we looked at a natural seawater sample, it would probably be quite different as well.
Yeah, it's like nutrients, right? If we measure nutrients in the Great Barrier Reef, it's 0 for nitrate and phosphate. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't be a good healthy reef tank, right?
Yeah.
In a similar way, the microbiome looks different in a reef tank compared to the Great Barrier Reef. And one of the big differences is that there's a huge amount of surface area in our reef tanks compared to the Great Barrier Reef, right? Because the surface area to volume ratio is much higher in our reef tanks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Great Barrier Reef doesn't have any walls. A reef tank is a bunch of walls.
Yeah. And that's all the surface
more
area,
surface,
right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
more surface per volume. Yeah, so it looks different. And so you have those two metrics. You have the diversity score and the balance score. And I'll say just something brief about each of those. It's not always true that a high diversity is good. It's generally true that a really low diversity score is not so good. A mature, healthy reef tank has sort of a medium range to higher diversity score. But when there's a disturbance in your community, diversity goes way up. And so we can sample communities that are having big problems with pathogenic bacteria that have really high diversity scores. So it isn't true necessarily that high diversity is always good.
Okay.
What is true, however, is that high balance is most always good. So a high balance indicates that there's a high correlation to the average typical reef tank between your sample and the average typical reef tank. And so some people get a little confused about that. And not surprisingly, because these are new data. Another thing that you hear a lot is when people get their reports back, they're not sure how the results are actionable.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that a lot.
Do about it. So I think I heard Sanjay the other day on Keith's Reef Bum show where he said, I'm not so sure how actionable it is. So if I do an ICP test and I have low fluoride, I can dose fluoride and raise it. Whereas a microbiome test, if I have low Pelagibacteriaceae, I'm not sure what I can do to make a correction. And so it is true that it's less actionable than an ICP test, but there are a number of things that can be done. And so in the case of Pelagibacter, that's one that we think is an indicator of an ideal community for coral health, also a marker of a mature community. And so one of the things that people have found is that by increasing water changes, that has helped to develop their Pelagibacter ACA populations. Mm. Another one, they can turn off their UV sterilizer. The UV sterilizer wipes out the fully pelagic bacteria.
Yeah, because these pelagic bacteria are free-swimming bacteria, typically.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned water changes actually help build those populations, because I guess what it's doing is making more room for those populations to proliferate.
I think it has to do with lowering dissolved organic carbon and some things that tend to suppress their population. So the Pelagibacter ACA is the most common group on the Great Barrier Reef, and it thrives in a low nutrient environment, in a ligotrophic environment. And water changes tend to promote that in our tanks. And I've shown that I can make a water change, and a couple days later, I have a big increase in my Pelagibacter ACA.
Crazy, that quickly.
Yeah.
And
there have been some people that have not had Pelagibacter ACA in their reefs, and I've been consulting with them. They've tried different things, and they found that over time, increasing water changes has resulted in it appearing.
Interesting.
So,
like, should
so
we look at the bacteria spectrum as being like, only so much space that can be filled? Like, because some of it is ratios are changing of how much
it is
different.
A zero-sum game.
But is it kind of like salinity? There's so much room for so many different bacterial populations to sort of fit together. So by doing these water changes, you're kind of freeing up more space potentially, or is it more that, like you're saying, these dissolved organic carbons are maybe supporting more of these other populations that maybe we don't want so much?
So that's a good question, and the best answer is that we don't know yet.
Yeah.
But I suspect it's a zero-sum game, and if you have some groups increase, you're going to have other groups decrease in your tank. But I can't say that's for sure. I can at least say that when Pelagibacter ACA increases in my samples, some other groups tend to decrease in the sample. That's a relative thing, right? Because it's like 10,000 sequences that are sampled from the water. So you could potentially have them both increasing, right? And it would still look like the other is decreasing.
Okay. Yeah, that's
but true. But I suspect that it does act as like a zero-sum game, and if some groups bloom, others decrease. But we need to test more to know that for sure. Now, there's some other things that you can do. So if you have a lower balance score, that sometimes is linked to other problems that you may be having in your tank, maybe dinoflagellates, cyanobacteria, other things. You can correct that by adding live sand from the ocean or live reef rubble from the ocean. And Eli's shown that you can adjust your community by adding live sand from the ocean. He also sells aquacultured live sand and tested reef rubble, but he's had a really hard time keeping it in stock because he tests it for pathogens and parasites before he sells it.
Yeah.
He has trouble with uranema being found in it, and so he's had a hard time keeping it in stock every month.
I mean, would it also be good if you know someone that has done Aquabionics and has a pretty good profile as far as their populations, maybe getting some sand or rock from their tank? Yeah.
Yes. So that's a better way to adjust your balance score. So if you know somebody who's got a mature reef tank that has a decent balance score and doesn't seem to have a lot of parasites or pathogens, yeah, by all means, you can get some live sand from them or some live rubble from them.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to adjust balance.
Yeah. I sell a little bit of my rock every once in a while from my sump or, from my main systems to people that ask. And, I don't know 100% if it does anything, but it's not, it definitely doesn't do nothing. It probably does something.
Yeah.
I'm going to say probably something good, but you never know, right?
So what I would recommend is that you put a tray of sand in your sump. And then consider doing that with sand because there's a lot more surface area on
Mm,
sand.
hmm.
And at least from what Eli has done, it seems like sand is the most effective way to adjust the microbiome.
Okay, that's
But
interesting.
we need
What,
to collect more
just to be a
data.
little bit specific about it, if you were gonna kind of have, let's call it like an underwater reverse swimming pool. Let's just say it's some kind of little container that's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's an earth pool. So would you go with maybe like up to 2 inches, like not super deep, maybe with a slightly coarser grade?
I would probably, I'm not sure if the grade matters. I would probably disturb the sand bed a little bit,
Hmm.
every few days to
Okay.
make sure it's all been exposed, and then probably needs to sit in your tank for a few months.
Yeah.
And then it would be really interesting then to sample that and see what the profile looks like.
Hmm.
Eli has found that he's been able to aquaculture live sand in normal aquariums with several inches of sand on the bottom by adding some sand from the ocean, just a little bit, and then measuring the community over time. And it's been pretty good at colonizing all the sand.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think you just have to be patient
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
try to do it too fast.
It
Yeah.
actually reminds me, at times when I've had certain wrasses, I've actually kept in the frag tanks. I've kept like a bowl of sand for the wrasse to just have a bed. So
Yeah.
I should probably just put
Yep.
that in the tanks anyways, because then that's another creature that's going to go in there and stir the sand up if it's burying itself every night too, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that, you can ship somebody a cup of sand and, you're hundreds of times giving them more surface area to volume
Hmm.
by providing them with live sand over some reef rubble. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good thing for people to maybe consider as far as, sharing and helping other hobbyists. And, people will do this with like a bacterial culture for sourdough or whatever. You
Yeah.
save that
Yeah.
bacterial culture. Maybe this is a thing that should become a common practice in the reef hobby is to kind of keep your shareable culture. And then, if
Yeah.
you start to have problems, somebody else that's got a good culture that can get it back to you.
Well, I'm hearing about that now with those bio blocks, from
Hmm.
I think it's Polyp Lab that makes these Genesis blocks or something.
Yeah.
It's supposed to have lots of surface area. So that might, I don't know how that compares to live sand, but it's a
Yeah.
similar kind of
Yeah.
idea.
Lots of
Yeah.
surface area. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so the other thing I was
Yeah.
going to mention was, so you can make corrections with live sand or live rock. There are occasionally some people, and it's usually people that have set up their tank with dry rock and have just never made it to that stable community, that adding live sand or adding reef rubble hasn't really been effective. And at least one of those people had a thread on Hubblefish, and he had really high levels of Vibrio and some other pathogens that he got back in his Aquabiomics reports. And he eventually treated the tank with antibiotics. And then he, right after that treatment regimen was done, he added a bunch of live sand. And
Okay.
that was effective at
Really?
resetting
So
his
it was like a
community.
reset. Yeah. Okay. So, that could have been a situation like we talked about where there just wasn't room in the population to allow for some of those,
Right.
positive, good strains that we want to kind of find their way in the balance.
Yep. It's like some communities are, when they're mature, they're competitive and they keep out new species.
Hmm.
And so that may be what happens in some cases.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so speaking of bad, let's call them bad guy bacterias. I mean,
Yeah.
because everything's fitting into a puzzle in a certain way, I'd say there probably are bacterias that are called bad, but they still, serve a function that probably is relevant in nature, but maybe not so much in our tanks. I think of Vibrio as being one of the bad ones. But is Vibrio just a naturally occurring seawater bacteria that should be in our tanks? That's kind of something I've always wondered about.
Well, there definitely should be Vibrio in your tank. It's one of those 18 major families that Eli finds in a mature, healthy tank. The question is, how many Vibrios do you have, and what
Hmm.
ones do you have? And the example I gave of, there's actually a few that I can think of tanks that were having lots of problems, had very, very high Vibrio levels, like, like I can't remember the exact number though, maybe like triple the amount of Vibrios than what is normal.
Yeah.
And in those cases, you've got much more than the normal mutualistic Vibrios that occur on corals naturally and occur with fish naturally. And then you've got probably a lot of pathogens.
Yeah, and I assume that these are sort of opportunistic in higher populations. So that's when you start seeing things like brown jelly disease, like some of these certain kinds of issues with corals, I would imagine, STN, RTN.
Well, brown jelly disease seems to be pretty closely linked to Arcobacter.
Okay.
This bacterium that Eli identified that you find on Gonies, Arcobacter 1103, you find on Gonies, you find it on Euphilia, and then I found it in Joe Caparata also was able to replicate this finding on Millies that were undergoing STN and RTN.
Okay. And is Arcobacter? I don't see Arcobacter on the graph here, but or on the chart. But is it part of a family?
Those show families, and so the Arcobacter family is not a major family. But what the report also does is it screens for individual pests, and you'll get at the bottom of the report, it'll screen for all the possible fish pests and coral pests. And so if you have Arcobacter in your tank, it'll flag it and it'll show you towards the bottom of the report.
Okay. So Arcobacter that's obviously one of the really bad ones, but again, is it one that would just exist naturally in most tanks at a like at a reasonable level, or is it just all around bad?
So we're going to get very philosophical here.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that a lot of the bad bacteria are present in most tanks, and they're just kind of there hanging out, and they opportunistically will start an infection if there's something that stresses out the corals. And I think it's certainly true. Like I'm sure lots of people can cite examples of putting a torch with brown jelly into their tank and it spreads throughout their tank. You certainly can introduce bad bacteria into your tank from somewhere else. But it's also true that we find, tanks that are doing great that have some of these pathogens in them, and they may not be causing a problem, at that time. If somebody sees Arcobacter on their report, the first thing they ought to do is go take a look at their Gonies and their Euphilia, and look to see if you can find any evidence of recession or disease. And if you can, take those out to reduce the population. And then there's things you can do to treat them.
Yeah, and I've heard actually people having good results treating Gonies that are struggling with oxalinic acid in a side bath. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, so either oxalinic acid or Cipro, you can put them in a 6-hour bath, and it's pretty effective.
Yeah. So higher concentration bath, and I mean, you have a lot of really nice Gonies, so I'm sure you've had some times you've treated things separately.
It happens.
Yeah.
So with Cipro, if I do with Cipro, it's a 250 milligram dose per gallon for 6 hours. So it's a high.
That's really high. Yeah. But also, I want to just say, I always consider these things like a last resort, last ditch effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's highly frowned upon in Europe to use any antibiotics for anything in our tanks. But we are learning that some of these things, like you say, the Arcobacter is a thing that, it shouldn't really exist in our tanks. Yeah, and it definitely, it seems like it is only a bad guy. So, it's one of our only ways to deal with it.
That's right. It doesn't have a positive role in our tanks. It can be there without causing problems, but usually if we find it at higher levels, there's something going on in the tank. And I think we were talking about ways to respond to that, right? So if I see Arcobacter on a report, I tell people to look closely at their Euphilia and their Gonies and look for tissue recession or brown jelly. And if they see it, pull those corals out of the tank, and then they can be treated in baths. And you can do a bath of Cipro or a bath of oxalinic acid at a high dose for 6 hours, And the Cipro, I do half a 250 gram dose per gallon for 6 hours. Oxalic acid, 5 grams per gallon for 6 hours. And I generally don't like to use antibiotics. However, if you have a disease where you're losing corals and you have that tool, I'm going to use the tool.
Yeah.
And in the case of treating it in a bath, it's not very risky that you're going to cause any sort of resistance to happen because you're not broadcast treating the entire tank.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, what do you think of like the Kung Fu corals, the KFC dip? Like, I think to me, it seems like it's like, let's just throw a whole bunch of antibiotics in and just nail the coral with everything possible. I don't know how I feel about that because it just seems like you're not really going after anything specific. You're just hitting it with a blowtorch of antibiotics, which could have repercussions down the road for bacterial resistance.
Right. And the reason why, there's a couple things I'll say about that. One is that's a lot riskier to do as an in-tank treatment because it's killing a broad swath of microbes in your tank. And then for dips, it's also riskier to dip because corals exist with a rich fauna of microbes, on their tissue. And so if you just indiscriminately wipe out most of those microbes on their tissue, you're going to cause a lot of mortality of the corals as well. Mm-hmm. And they're just kind of putting all sorts of antibiotics together to see what works.
Yeah.
So
because the microbiome on the coral tissue may be essentially part of the coral's immune system in a way because it's a balance. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of, surfaces, biofilms, I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit, just because there's a misconception in the hobby about how, the bad bacteria is more in the water column and the good bacteria is on the surfaces. But, just talking about the Pelagibacter, that's your main waterborne bacteria, that completely debunks that. I mean, I don't know where that came from, but it sounds like that really has no relevance in this this whole situation.
Well, I think it comes from ammonia oxidizers and nitrite oxidizers being associated with live rock, and so I think that's where that idea comes from, that they're on the rocks, and mm-hmm. So that's what you need to worry about. But in a recirculating system that has a large amount of surface area per volume, you can find all those bacteria in the water column. They get blown off all the surfaces. Yeah. One of the discoveries from the Aquabionics research is that every single family that you typically see in a tank, you find in the water in a sample. You can find higher levels of ammonia oxidizers and nitrite oxidizers on the surface from the swab that you use to swab the pipe, but they're also found in the water column. And so they're all in the water.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's possible to have too much surface area? For example, it's been suggested to me to potentially actually it could have benefits to my system to take a lot of the live rock out of my sump in my main system because it's a frag system with a lot of rock in the sump and no rock in the tank. And maybe potentially some of the bacteria that could be available for the corals as food is being taken in and neutralized by the bacteria on the rock surfaces.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I in my own experience, I have had more success in terms of stability in the microbiome when I have more surface area.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. Yeah. But it's an interesting thought experiment,
Yeah. I mean, as an example, I have a frag system in my garage that I set up, and I wanted to be bare bottom, but I just went through longer ugly stages than I've ever gone through as I cycled it, even though I started out with live rock, fully mature live rock. And then I added some live sand in a little tray in the sump, and that seemed to help. And so I think in the future I might start out new tanks with a tray of live sand and then pull it out later on if I don't want to have it there long term.
It's called the land pool, by the way. We've determined that's the name.
The land pool.
Yeah, land pool.
I like it.
Earthing pool. I don't know.
We could probably trademark that.
Yeah.
Buy your land pool material from Frag Garage.
Yeah, for sure. It's just rock in like a Tupperware container.
Exactly.
With a sticker on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, something that's a good example of how, impacting biofilms is like if you transfer a tank, an existing system to a new system, you always get a cycle on the new glass and the new surfaces. That kind of tells you immediately Absolutely. That, you've got surfaces that have zero population, and those surfaces need to be populated, in the composition that is favorable to the tank too, so,
Yep.
How do you guarantee that? Probably by having, more live rock or other things brought over from the other tank that help, establish those surfaces as fast as they can.
But it still takes, that's the situation I was at with my garage frag tank. I had all the good stuff there in the live rock, and what you're talking about absolutely happened. All those clean surfaces just got covered in dinoflagellates and chrysophytes and just all kinds of ugly stuff. Mm-hmm. And so even if you have all the right stuff on the rocks, it takes a while for it to outcompete the early stage microbes like that we see when a tank is young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of your journey through this, what were some of the things that you sort of employed from what you took back from the data that you employed on your tank, and some conclusions you came to as far as like maybe some things other people can look at and try to replicate?
Yeah, that's a good question. So because I followed my tank, from day one, pretty much, I was able to watch the community as it went through the early successional stages and then reach that climax community where it was very similar to the mature, healthy microbiome that Eli sees, across thousands of tanks. Basically, when the Pelagibacteriaceae showed up, if you look at the first few reports, there's lots of turmoil. There's chaos in the microbial community. Mm-hmm. And then you reach that climax community where the Pelagibacteriaceae is there. The other 17 or so major families are there. And then you have a lot more stability over time. And once I got to that really stable stage in this new tank, I had a long period of really accelerated SPS growth where my Oregon torts just grew as fast as I've ever had them. And so I kept taking Aquabionics reports to document, when the tank was doing really well, what the microbial community looked like. And then I had some things happen where I kind of got behind on cleaning up detritus in the tank. And the community shifted, and I talk about this in the first interview with Eli on Reef a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. So you can see the community shift from a Pelagibacteriaceae dominated community to a Rhodobacteriaceae dominated community, and Rhodobacteriaceae is associated with surfaces and detritus. Mm-hmm. And so I could see how I was shifting the community to a different Rhodobacteriaceae dominated community. At the same time, I was starting to have issues with coral disease, with brown jelly, and I was starting to see pathogens pop up like Archobacter and Vibrios and other things.
Yeah.
And so that's when I think we talked about. That's when I added a roller mat and did some things to change my husbandry and to reduce the available all the detritus and reduce the stuff that would sit and accumulate those bacteria.
Yeah, so it sounds like getting detritus out really might be one of the pretty key things, and not just, siphoning it and doing more water changes, but also, the roller mat is essentially lifting that detritus or those particles out of the tank before they, have a chance to even sort of react and colonize with bacteria. So you're getting it out ahead. So it's definitely a good reinforcing thing that roller mats are good. I mean, I think maybe not for a brand new system, but for an established system that, doesn't have a good population profile, maybe a roller mat is a really good choice.
Yeah, it's funny. I tried a roller mat on that same Frag system that I set up, mm-hmm. and I couldn't keep it going because my nutrients were just too low. Mm-hmm. I kept turning it off. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right. It really is only effective when you have I don't know. I'm going to throw a number out there. Maybe a system that's 2 years old, year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah.
Probably.
It's kind of a thing in the hobby, is like getting the biology, the functions of all the biology going, and that's like why I almost like the idea of being like setting up a tank and getting some big ugly corals in it. Just whatever. Does your friend have a big colony of, I don't know, something kind of not worth much, but that takes up some space because that gets biology happening, and especially a barren tank that is started on dry rock, just has a few frags in it. It's like there's not a lot of biological function that can happen, or at least to get it kickstarted. So yeah.
I totally agree with that, and that's one of the reasons why I always have big green slimer colonies and big Tyree green toadstool colonies. That's what I use that for. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Even like locally, like if someone in Victoria is listening to this, I probably got some corals I can loan you guys for, a couple months to get a tank started. Yeah. You want a big chalice the size of a dinner plate? Yeah, you can borrow it for a bit. Corals that can get that can start consuming alkalinity and calcium and magnesium, and just kind of get the whole dosing system going. Mm-hmm. That's really critical, I think. Yeah, totally. I mean, somebody came by yesterday to pick up some corals, and they were like, "I just can't get my pH doesn't change much. It's 7.9 to 8.1," and I said, "Well, it's because you don't have a lot of corals in there yet. Just not a lot is happening. There's not a lot of photosynthesis happening. That's why we get our pH." Peak during the day, because a lot of that carbon dioxide is getting taken in by the zooxanthellae in the system. And, if you don't have a lot of, again, biology happening, you're not going to see a big swing in pH. You're going to see a 0.2 swing over the day or something like that. So the more those corals start growing, the more alkalinity you dose, the more photosynthesis that happens, I think the more pH you're going to see in terms of peak. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. So hopefully that was a good answer for him. I think it sounds about right, but yeah. I try to answer things the best I can. But speaking of which, you're an educator, right? That's kind of your background. Yeah, I teach introductory biology. Yeah, okay. To many students. Yeah, so that's why you're so good at explaining things. Yeah, don't go look at my rate my professor scores or anything like that. But now I'm gonna do it. That's where all the angry people go. Yeah. But yeah, I've been teaching intro biology for 15 years and love doing it. I love one of the things I love about the hobby is it's applied biology that people are able to do in their homes. Yeah. And it's just so cool. I'm also the president of the PNW MAS, which is our Pacific Northwest Marine Aquarium Society. It's our Reef club. It's mostly Portland metro area, and it's another thing I love about that club is it's applied biology. Yeah, and community sort of people getting together and helping each other out, and that's super cool. Yeah. Okay. Was there anything else we wanted to say about the Aquabionics, bacterial community stuff? Otherwise, we can move to the kind of second half of this convo about more about you as a hobbyist. Yeah. I think that's probably it. I guess I'll just reiterate that when people say that the data are not actionable, I think it's probably because either your community is looking good and there's no reason to take action, or it's maybe you could it would help to have the report interpreted for you. And so one thing that I'm always happy to do is if you go to Humblefish forum,
Aquabionics has a subforum there, and people post their reports. And if they have questions, I'm happy to jump in there and answer questions.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and again, it's a service that and I'm a bit of a hypocrite for this because I haven't done it yet, but it's only going to get better as more people send in tests and the database builds. And there's a questionnaire that goes along with different aspects of how you run your system, right?
Yeah,
like if you run UV, if you've done any antibiotic treatments, all kinds of things. Started from dry rock, right? I guess we can post. Maybe I'll post a little video, a clip of what the requirements are. But either way, the more samples that get sent in, the better the database, the better the service will be. Yeah. So and I mean, I appreciate that you have taken this deep dive into it, because you've been like a guinea pig for people that are a little hesitant to maybe spend the money to do the testing on a regular basis, and that's the other thing. You got to do it on a regular basis to really see how the changes you make impact it.
It's funny, here's some people say, are you a biome keeper or a reef tank keeper? And to which I say, if you have a good reef tank, without realizing it, you're a good microbiome keeper. Because having a good microbiome is important to maintaining a good reef tank long term, for sure. And so I'm most certainly I'm both.
Yeah.
And I love a good looking tank as much as anybody.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't be doing these tests, and I wouldn't be trying to learn more about these different families of bacteria if I didn't think that they helped me to achieve a stable, beautiful tank long term.
Yeah, totally. And just as a final thing, I think what you're talking about too is like, getting your tank into a stride, like getting it into, that period where you look at it and you're like, things are doing really good right now. And, a way to explain that, I mean, I'm sure trace elements and, the balance of elements in your saltwater matter, but I think, we've kind of overlooked or not looked into the bacterial populations enough as, maybe being one of the main drivers of, a healthy system hitting a stride. So, if we can take some data from this and, employ that to our tanks, then we sort of know, maybe we can maintain that stride for more than a few months or a few weeks. Yeah. Sometimes it's up and down and up and down. So,
Yeah, I mean, some people have used ICP in the past in a way that doesn't necessarily capture when things are going well. They see a problem, they send in an ICP test. But what's your baseline, right? What does your ICP look like when your tank is doing well? And the same thing should be applied to the Aquabiomics tests. You ought to have a baseline for, this is what my community looks like. There's convergence among all of these thousands of tanks that Eli looks like. They have similar healthy systems, right? But there are some differences sometimes we find. And so, what does Frag Garage's, bomb and tank look like when it's doing well? And then if you have that on the shelf, if you have those data, and you have another sample that you can do when things go wrong, then you can have an idea perhaps about what's happening in your tank.
Totally.
And that's what I recommend. That's how I recommend people use it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I'll try to do is I'll have you and Eli on at some point, and I'll have I'll send a test in before so we can talk about mine.
Yeah, that'd be cool. We could interpret. I'd love to see what your system looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I've got 3 main systems, so even just to look at all of them would be pretty interesting, because they're all run fairly differently and they have different types of corals in them, and so that could definitely be interesting. So I'll reach out and we'll take it from there. But all right, let's move on to part 2, and thanks for meeting up again today.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks, man. Let's kind of talk about maybe some of your corals and take a look at your tank and stuff, because I think it's nice to look at a reef tank that's not a farm.
Yeah.
And like, tell me about the tank a little bit, like the size, how long it's been set up, and we can kind of get into some of the equipment and stuff like that. And I'll show some videos of it while we're talking about it.
Yeah. So it is a Red Sea Reefer XXL 750, first generation. Does that model?
Ooh, yeah, first generation. Yeah, those are the ones that can bust out on you.
Those are the ones that yes. So I can't convince my wife that we should replace it until it actually starts leaking. So
Yeah, and the 750 is about what is that? Is that about 180
It's
gallons?
160 gallons in
Okay,
the display and then 40 gallons in the sump. So
nice.
about 200 gallons total system. Yeah.
Hmm.
And, I love the layout, 6 foot tank. It's got, room for tangs to swim in. And I love the tank otherwise. It's just, I check the seams every morning.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it looks like you've got a really good balance of, a mixed reef, which is hard to do. So I'm gonna sort of ask about some of your par numbers and how you get everything to sort
Yeah.
of get along.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you said there it's a reefer 750. Lights, are they radions or are they something a little different?
No, they're Refi Unos, Refi Uno
Okay.
2.0s.
Okay. Cool.
I will, yeah, I've been a Refi customer for, I think I was the one of the first customers because the owner of the company was also in the Pacific Northwest and used to be in Portland.
Hmm.
Now he's up in Redmond, up by Seattle. But yeah, I've been a user of his lights for since 2018, and I don't think there's a better light on the market than the Refi Uno Pro 2.0. It's a
Nice.
fantastic fixture. It's a 270-watt fixture that has 8 different channels that you can individually adjust. It's got 3 different kinds of reflectors, so you can go 90 degree, 60 degree, or 120, and so you can raise it, different levels from the surface to get more spread or less. And
Hmm. That's a
um,
pretty cool option, actually. So
yep,
you just change that. Sorry, is it like a reflector or a lens? Like, is it sort of changing the?
it's not a lens;
No.
it's a reflector. Yep,
Okay.
it's a
Interesting.
reflector. It's similar to the design that GHL lights have with
Yeah.
those reflectors. Each
Yeah.
diode has a reflector. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I'll put a link to those lights because I think I've maybe talked to one other reefer that used them, but I'm not super familiar, and I'm gonna assume the price point is pretty fair on them too compared to
Oh yeah,
other
they're
tech. Yeah.
they're they retail for $480,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's 270 watts. It's a great deal. It's
Cool.
The owner is a former Intel chip designer who used
Oh.
to work in Hillsboro here and design Intel chips, and he decided that he'd rather make reefing stuff, and
Hmm.
so this has been his pet project for the last since 2018.
That's pretty cool.
So
Nice.
he's made a fantastic product.
So as far as finding the sort of par balance for keeping SPS and quite a large Ghani garden, and probably some other. I think the only LPS actually you got like some Favia in there, but it's
I've
pretty
got some
much
Favia
it's mostly
Wells,
just Ghanis. Yeah,
single Wells affiliate, mostly
yeah,
Ghanis. Yeah.
yeah. So how do you kind of find a par balance? Like, did you find some of the because the tank to me looks like the higher regions are going to be in the 300 to 400 par range.
Oh
That's my
no,
guess. Is it higher?
they're like 700, 800.
Oh
Yeah,
wow,
they're really
crazy.
high.
So what is
Yep.
your sandbed par then?
Um, so it's been a little while, but I want to say no lower than 150,
Hmm. Okay. Okay. So
and that probably varies a little bit.
yeah.
But
Okay. Interesting.
I
So
have some colonies that are pretty high up in the tank, and those are getting about 700 par.
yeah. Okay. Wild. So with new Ghanies that you introduced, because you probably got I don't know like how many different varieties here, like 25, 30. It's quite a few.
Well, I used to have more, but
Yeah.
I've had some issues recently. I used to have about 25 different
Yeah.
varieties, and I've got some duplicates in there now.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess so.
Um, you're going to say, how do I
How do you
introduce a
do
new
you do
one?
you do yeah like do you if you introduce a new one like I would be concerned that you would want to start them at even a lower par like around 50 or 100 or something and then bring them up. Would you start them off to the side or on a rack or something?
Yeah, I tend to I tend to put them more off to the side at first, although it's not really a conscious decision about lowering par. But now that you mention it, yes, they are towards the outer part of the tank when I first introduced them.
Hmm.
They I have my Ghanis in I observe them for at least a month or so before I put them in my display. I have them in a tank where they're probably getting about yeah, probably about 100 So
Yeah.
it is a bit of a jump from my
Mhm.
frag system.
Okay. Yeah. So some of them will start in a frag system and move to the main
Yeah.
system. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm assuming some of these are aquacultured pieces that you bought as a frag, and like, are some of them wild collected?
Um, so I've trying to think. There probably a few of them are. Most of them I've cut many times
Hmm.
and made a ton of frags of.
Yeah, that's great.
Um, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I guess I'm asking about the Gaunies a lot because I've had certain pieces I've had great success with, and then I've had, some pieces that I just can't grow, and eventually they wither and die on me. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, I've had that
I'm
happen to
trying to
me
figure it
too.
out.
Yep.
Yeah.
What are some of the ones you haven't had as much success with?
Well, I had a maze balls, and extended and opened well and looked great for a couple months, and then eventually just sort of didn't open as much, and then it just eventually kind of bleached out, and that was that. I just couldn't really grow that one. And some people are able to aquaculture that coral no problem. So
Yeah.
yeah,
The
I'm not
Coral
sure.
Kings, they produce those things by
Yeah,
by the hundreds. I don't know how they do it
yeah.
in Buffalo. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'll have to talk to them then. But
You need to, right. You
yeah,
need to talk to them about Ghani's.
yeah.
Exactly.
Just in
I
general,
mean,
though, like, what's your sort of feeding protocol for, do you do like a broadcast feed for corals, or do you,
nope. I
yeah.
don't feed, no, I don't feed anything except I feed my fish fairly heavy.
Mm-hmm.
But I have like fed with different foods in the past, and I just can't see much of a difference in how
Yeah,
my corals do.
yeah. I tend to agree, actually. You know, it's kind of it's a problem with I mean, this hobby and wanting to tweak and wanting to try things is you always have a hope in your head when you make a change that, you know, it's going to be something that's going to get you to that next level or give you that little extra, boost in color or growth that you wanted. But it's often, we rarely see something really make a big impact. Like, is there anything you think that you've made a change that you would say has made a big impact, maybe other than the filter roller thing?
Well, the ammonium bicarbonate
Yeah.
that I
Okay.
mentioned
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's a good question. Um, Besides those two things, nothing quite as impactful, except, well, I guess, okay, that's not true. I do trace element dosing using the Captivate products.
Hmm.
That's been a big upgrade for me.
Yeah.
So that that's a similar system to the Reef Moonshiner system, where it's based on a spreadsheet where you enter your ICP values and it tells you how much to add of the different supplements. And the big advantage it has over Reef Moonshiners is that it's designed to be mixed together in a cocktail.
Hmm.
And so I have all my, you can buy all your individual elements, and the starting pack of, can't remember, maybe 10, 15, I can't remember how many, is only 19.99. It's a cheap thing to start out with.
Hmm.
And you can buy bigger bottles for the rest of the stuff. And then it's a really simple system. You just you can use any ICP and enter it into your spreadsheet, and then it tells you how much to
Hmm.
mix into your cocktail. And you can do it for a month or 2 months. And then once you do the next month, you tell your spreadsheet how much your cocktail was for the previous month, and it'll adjust based on how much you used from one month to the next.
Hmm.
And so it's great.
Yeah.
It's basically like Reef Moonshiners, but you don't have to dose in
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
individual.
Yeah, the daily dosing thing is the thing that kind of, I think, drives me a bit nuts. One of the things I actually started doing as opposed to daily dosing is I actually just modified my Bowling A and B. I put more fluoride in the alkalinity solution. Like, I put the elements that get along with each of those mixtures. I just increase those.
Yeah.
So, those doses are going in 24 times a day anyways.
Yeah.
I might as well just not bother. And then, yeah, I'll do the monthly ICP. I'll see how that impacted, see if I need to increase or decrease. But yeah, so you're doing ICPs, obviously. Are you doing it kind of monthly or fairly regularly?
I've done either once per month or every 2 months, depending on kind of what I'm feeling like, if I'm going to be around or not.
Hmm.
Um, I've had similar success. I mean, it's easier to do it every 2 months because you can make a cocktail for 2 months, then it's,
Hmm.
less work.
You're just more stuck.
Um,
You're stuck with it if you need to,
that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Potentially, if something goes wrong and you decide you want to redo it or something, you waste more elements,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But it's been great.
Yeah, and they're pretty
I
pretty concentrated too, right? Like a lot of Chris's
Yeah. Oh
product
yeah.
line
They're
is,
very
yeah,
concentrated.
yeah,
It's a high quality product.
yeah.
It's really well done. It's a little hard to find, on his website. Like he sells larger bottles of things that you
Hmm.
can buy from him that he doesn't always sell to the resellers because of shipping costs and stuff. And
Hmm.
so if you can navigate his website, or better actually to email him, he's very helpful and very responsive. And he could send you a link to like a bigger bottle of fluoride, for example. Because I
Yeah,
go through fluoride. It's like there's no
yeah,
tomorrow,
that's a thing too, hey, is fluoride, not to mention any other brands. Actually the pricing's pretty good on the Fauna fluoride for the size because it's 1 liter, but I think
Yeah,
the Captivate's probably pretty concentrated. I think it comes in a smaller
it's
bottle,
really
but it's probably really
concentrated. You can get
concentrated.
a
Yeah.
you can get a big bottle of it directly from Chris, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's the way to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
And I will say, okay, so I will say that um, I really can see when I dose fluoride because I have a big colony of Procoral's rainbow stag,
Hmm.
and the tips turn blue when I have
Hmm.
enough fluoride.
Interesting. Yeah.
And if I don't, they fade and they're not. It's just
Hmm.
all red,
Yeah.
right? They don't have the blue tips.
Yeah. So that's kind of your canary coral for fluoride. You kind of have a indication species, which is kind of
Yeah,
nice.
I've been pretty good about
Yeah.
not letting it lose the blue. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
fortunately,
Yeah, it was interesting. One of the guests I talked to about his tank, Bertus Eckstein, I did the tank feature on his tank. I think he was saying that strontium, he could really tell. I think it was the forest fire digi would tell him if the strontium was
huh,
low, because it just wouldn't have
interesting.
that extra pop or whatever. So it's nice to have,
Huh.
that's where the really having the blue thumb,
Yeah.
honed in your blue thumb because you know what to look for. That really comes into play for sure. But yeah, no, I think trace elements, no matter what system you're using, adding something is always better than adding nothing. And having even just a picture of what's going on, even twice a year, is better than not having any clue. Unless ignorance is bliss. I don't
Well,
know if you like just autopiloting and not thinking
no,
about it.
it's not.
No.
At least for me, it's not. I
Yeah.
mean, I would say an added bonus is if being on a system like this forces you to do an ICP once a month, you catch all kinds of dumb mistakes that you're otherwise going to make. Like you don't let your salinity get too low or too
Totally.
high.
Yeah.
You don't. There's your calcium get too low, or things that maybe, or magnesium get weird. Things that maybe you don't test as often as alkalinity. Um, I've caught myself, prevented myself from doing dumb things many times.
Yeah, totally. I
So,
mean, salinity is a really good point because I mean, on a hobby level, like maybe hydrometer and like a well calibrated refractometer can be good, but there's still just factors that we just don't have the most ideal scientific way to test everything. So yeah, what are you doing there? You looking for something?
sorry, I just realized that I hadn't turned on my computer charger, so
Oh yeah, cool. We were
my
gonna die,
computer was getting
maybe.
low. Sorry, I
Yeah.
know that made a bunch of noise.
That's fine.
So,
Yeah.
okay, we're
No,
good.
I was just saying. I mean, I don't love the salinity testing that we have on a hobby level. Like, obviously they can be a good indication. But one thing I actually do is if I ever get something from like corals from a store or fish or something, I will test my salinity against other people's salinity. Just to, if I do see some wild discrepancy, I'll be like either contact them or I'll double check my calibration or I'll check against something else because that's another reference point for you, right?
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I sort of triangulate. I have the Milwaukee tester. I have the fancy one from Tropic Marin, the what is that? The density based hygrometer.
Hmm.
I can't remember what that thing is called exactly, but
I've
I've
heard
like
good things about
had
that
two
one
different.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it it tends to be fairly consistent when I match it up to my other two other ways of measuring it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I definitely have some redundancy every once in a while, like maybe once every couple of months, I'll check. What I use the most often is the Milwaukee one, and I'll make sure my Milwaukee one isn't off.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've got the Milwaukee one now, the digital refractometer, which seems
Yeah,
pretty
that's
good.
nice.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. That was recommended to me by Doug Dorrit. He's a big advocate of that one. So I was like, all right, I'll give it a
Yeah,
try. Yeah.
it works great.
Yeah.
Super easy to use. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. So as far as like trace elements, are there any others that you noticed like once you kind of got them into range, like, other than fluoride, was there anything else that you kind of would say you would put in a top priority from your, observation?
There's there's so many of them, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I can't really say anything. The reason I know about fluoride is because I didn't have fluoride at first, and so I wasn't doing that one at first, and then I added it, and I saw a difference.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure about the other ones.
Yeah.
I just kind of figure that having them all kind of in range is good,
Yeah.
and I've generally had pretty good success since I've been doing that. So I will say one thing, however, is that it probably lulled me into a false sense of security that I never needed to do water changes. Like
Mm.
I ran my system for about a year and a half without any water changes at
Mm.
all because I was doing all the corrections with those with those spreadsheets using Captivate products, and my dissolved organic carbon got kind of high,
Mm-hmm.
and then I ended up having some issues where I had an outbreak of that Ghani disease,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know whether they were related, but it's resulted in me changing my practice a little bit.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
now, instead of just totally foregoing water changes, now I do about 10% water change a month. That's kind of built into my normal protocol, so it's factored in, from 1 month to the next with the spreadsheet corrections.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that even though you could do all your supplementation for the inorganic chemistry, I think there's other considerations that you need to have in mind with it water changes help with.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
DOC.
Yeah, now that the DOC discussion is happening, I think that, yeah, I've increased my water change amounts, or frequency. I wouldn't say amount. It's actually, increased the frequency because I was doing like 20% a month or every month and a half, and now I'm doing 10% every 2 weeks, and that seems to be better.
Yeah.
I think that seems to be a better way to do it. It's like, not even
Well,
really that much more work. It's like,
yep.
you know,
I mean, for me at least, I was able to have my DOC go way down,
mm-hmm.
so I could see an immediate impact
Yeah.
from in that metric.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going on two different tests, but when I did it with Oshiamo, it was 12, and then when I did the SA, well, one is SAK and one is SAC 254. I think it's the same. I think it's just a different. You think
You
it's
mean between fauna
yeah, because
marin
Fauna
and
added the SAK 254. I just assume it's a different machine that tests
it's
the same.
I,
It's the
I
same
think it's
nano.
probably
It's the same wavelength
right.
it's testing, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think it was 2.4 or something on my Fauna one after 2 months of increasing my water changes. So my DOCs went down
And
like
where
10 in that amount of time.
where is that in their range? Do they have
Uh,
a recommended range?
I think the recommended range is like, what is it, like 2 to 6 or something like that.
Christoph's is 2 to 8.
2 to 8. Okay, maybe that's, yeah. I have to double check because it's a newer parameter to me as far as
Yeah.
a thing I pay attention to. Either way, I went from being above the acceptable range to like right in the low end of the range
Yeah.
within a fairly short amount of time. So,
Have you done a Triton endoc test before?
no, they're not easy to get in Canada, so I would have to
Oh,
order
okay.
from the US, and then I don't know what it's
Yeah.
going to cost to ship it out. But I thought that my theory is that just doing this SAC 254, it's still giving you a piece of the picture. And, if in a reef tank, the other DOCs are in a common relation or ratio to that, it's still going to give you a bit of an indication. But I could be wrong, it's such an open area as far as like, what kind of data and research we're going to get. But
no, I mean, I either do the Oshimo mass spec test, or I do the fauna marin test. And yeah, I'll just use those data. I mean, I have also have data from NDOC, and so both tests showed me well above the range of the acceptable range.
Yeah.
And so I knew that, I increased my water change regimen, and I also started using some activated carbon. Unfortunately, I took a microbiome snapshot right at the same time, right when I had this disease, and I thought it was going to be this big revelation, but the DNA extraction failed, which it happens every once in a while, like maybe like one time out of a few hundred or something, and it just happened to that sample. So
it's too bad. Yeah,
I know. Yeah. So bummed.
One of the times where you really wanted that data point to kind of
exactly. I know. Yeah. Eli ran it a few times, and it just couldn't get good data out of it.
So that's a thing that happens, I guess. Is it a thing where a sample gets contaminated, or like what kind of?
No, it's just, every once in a while, the DNA extraction process where you get you have to extract the DNA from from all the surrounding stuff and purify it, and then use it for the PCR reaction, which amplifies the part of the DNA that you're looking for. It just occasionally it just fails. There's just I don't know how well we understand that exactly what happens, but there's a low rate of failure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. It's a low rate of failure, and I'm sure there's a reasonable way that it's compensated if that happens with.
He just if that happens, he sends you a new test and says sorry.
Yeah.
It's a known thing that happens. Very rarely, occasionally.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess speaking of, we were talking about water changes. What salt brand are you using, and why did you kind of settle on that?
Yeah, so for the longest time I used the Red Sea Blue Bucket salt, but recently I've been experimenting with the Aquaforest Reef salt, and I like that. I like that also. So I think I don't know. I think I might stick with that one. They've had pretty good deals on it recently, so. I mean, I in the past I haven't done tons of water changes, so I haven't been quite as price conscious maybe as some people are. But what I like in a salt is that it consistently gives me an elk that's like 8, right around there, or 7.5 or so, and those tend to do that. And I like it to mix up fast.
Yeah,
I hate it. It doesn't mix up fast.
No, for sure. I always found the Brightwell took a really long time to mix. It was a very
Instant Ocean, man. Ocean, man. It takes forever.
Yeah, it's not a good sign. Hey, it's like all of those.
Like, what is all that extra stuff?
I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting. You're probably the first on this podcast to use Aquaforest. I remember when Aquaforest came out and their sort of probiotic salt, they had a lot of good marketing behind it, and a lot of people were trying it and seemed to like it. But then it seemed to just kind of fall away. So that's interesting.
The one that I use is not the probiotic one.
Yeah.
It's just their regular reef salt.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anything about the probiotic one. I don't think I would use that. Most of the probiotics in the reefing industry are not, not worth the.
It's almost just like slapping a marketing term on something like natural. Natural doesn't actually mean anything really, or like, even the term organic is kind of funny because we talk about organic and inorganic chemistry, but
right.
Organic is a term that more has to do with agriculture and
that's right.
It's a weird misuse of the term, but yeah.
I mean, most of the bacterial products are bacillus, like terrestrial species. We don't have much
Yeah.
We don't have much,
Well, and it would have to be something that is preserved in a form dry that can be mixed, into your salt and becomes
yeah,
active, which, I'm
right.
skeptical. I think,
Yeah.
if
So
someone
those
wants
kind
to
of, yeah.
prove me wrong, they can. But let's move on to your parameters a little bit. We talked about your nitrates and phosphates being in that 100-to-1 ratio, the reefers ratio, you said you call it? Yeah.
The reefer ratio,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
not to be confused with the Redfield ratio.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So would you say, is there anything out of the major parameters, the alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, anything out of the ordinary, or are we talking pretty standard ranges?
Pretty standard ranges. I don't like to go higher than 8 with alkalinity.
Yeah,
I find that when I first started reefing, I read somewhere that if you have alkalinity at 10, you'll get fast growth with SPS. And so I tried to raise my alkalinity up to 10, and I turned my sand bed into a solid brick,
crazy.
you know.
Yeah,
And I don't know. I find that things just tend to work pretty well at around 8.
yeah, I agree.
7.5 to 8 is the
Hmm.
sweet spot for me.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I've kind of brought my happy range down a little because I used to say 8 to 8.5 and sort of shoot for 8.3, 8.25, and now I'm kind of shooting more for 7.8 to 8 kind of thing. Like that's kind of my happy zone where things seem to be the happiest. It's very subtle though, but it's like, you know what I mean? And sometimes you just kind of know your tank. It's the blue thumb thing again. You just kind of look at the tank and
Yeah.
you just kind of know, and you'll see the difference if for some reason your elk gets bumped to 8.6 or 8.7 for whatever reason, some corals just don't look quite as good.
I totally agree. But if you were to ask me, like, what do I think the most important parameters are, I would always say nutrients, and the
Yeah,
nutrients that you've got a good ratio of nitrate to phosphate.
yeah,
Whenever I have had problems, it has had something to do with nutrients. And so I'm the president of the Pacific Northwest Marine Aquarium Society, which is a club in Portland,
hmm,
mostly the Portland metro area in Oregon. Um, and I'm always consulting with people, with hobbyists that are having problems in their tanks in that role. And it seems like most of the time it's nutrient related. It's
yeah,
either a young tank where nutrients are really, really low, or it's a tank that is being overfed and nutrients are high. And
hmm,
it's just
yeah,
most of the time, I don't know. It's harder to achieve that stable nutrient level, harder than things like alkalinity and calcium that you can dose. Um,
hmm, totally. I mean, those are kind of just those are numbers. Those are numbers that don't necessarily. I mean, sure they interact, but it's not. I know what you mean when it comes to nutrients. I do agree that nutrients seem to be the make or break for more tanks because it's easier to get a foundation of like your alk close to 8, your calcium above around 400 or 430 or whatever, your magnesium
yeah,
I don't know 1300 to 1400. It's not hard to achieve that, but the
and it's
times,
gotten a lot
yeah,
easier. It's
yeah,
gotten easier because so many supplements are like the I tend to use the ATI Essentials Pro, where there's 1 and 2, and 1 is alkalinity, 2 is calcium and magnesium and all the trace elements,
hmm,
and they're balanced. So you dose the same amount of each, and you are pretty much in range.
hmm,
Same thing is true with the Bionic and the Triton, and there's a lot of tools that make it fairly easy to keep your parameters
yeah,
constant. But and this was a real breakthrough for me years ago in reefing. Uh, I for whatever reason I discovered that if I kind of let my tank run on its own and did not supplement, my nitrate would always get down to 0.
hmm,
My nitrate would always get lower than my phosphate, and when that happened, I would end up with dinoflagellate issues, a lot of cyano issues. That imbalance was problematic, and for some reason, my tanks just would always drift that way.
yeah, mine as
I
well,
don't know if
yeah,
I don't know if it's skimmers being really good at pulling nitrate out of the water and not as good at phosphate. And the real eureka moment I had was when I started dosing nitrate to bring my nitrate up. above my phosphate. And then I was like, okay, then everything started to work.
Yeah.
All those problems got a lot easier to solve.
And then that got even better when you switched to ammonia bicarbonate.
And then, right.
Yeah.
And, and so many people don't seem to be aware of that, that if you just run your tank, a lot of times nitrates go to zero.
Yeah, especially based on what we were talking about before, how people are kind of a little bit too overly, like running their skimmers and running, say, filter rollers on a new tank and stuff like that. Maybe doing water changes too often on a new tank. That's another thing too, right? It's like, I actually, one of my big LPS system, like I was saying, I was doing water changes out of my other tanks into it to get it established. And I don't think I did an actual water change on that tank until maybe 4 to 6 months after the tank was set up. Because it just didn't, there was no point. I didn't need to take anything out, and I knew the water from my other systems was good water. So,
probably had all the trace elements and everything in it. So
at least a decent composition. Yeah, for sure.
I think it depends on how much, I think it depends on how much, dry rock you have in the system, because that dry rock just sucks up the nitrate and the phosphate like crazy.
Yeah, and I've heard that too with live rock in general is phosphates will bind and get sort of bound up in your rock, and there is a saturation point where they kind of max out. So if you've had trouble getting a phosphate reading for a duration of time your tank's been set up, if you keep dosing phosphates, once you get it there, it may get to a point where it reaches that saturation point and holds. And I've gotten to that point now. But it took me a long time. It took me a long time of dosing phosphates, even uncomfortable amounts of phosphates, So, yeah.
I mean, the whole concept of dosing phosphate was a real a hard one for me to wrap my brain around when I first started doing it.
Totally.
Because all the things I do to reduce phosphate in my other system. To expand on the filter roller thing, one thing that is nice if you have your filter roller set up from your return is if you want to use a little lanthanum chloride to reduce your phosphate, if you drop it into the return, then it gets pulled out of the water by the filter roller, at least a fair amount of it, because when I dose it, I dose a little bit, like 2 mLs in the morning. About 10, 15 seconds later, I hear the filter roller go.
Okay. Yeah. So the precipitation that happens from the lanthanum chloride, it gets pulled out really quick.
Yep.
Okay.
The lanthanum phosphate, it gets pulled out. At least some proportion of it gets pulled out by that filter roller.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's a good thing to keep in mind.
It makes a very satisfying sound.
Yeah.
I can hear my phosphate being pulled out of the water.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Very literal thing happening.
Exactly.
Yeah. Nice. I don't think I asked. We'll go into maybe we'll do the rapid fire questions. I haven't done them with a guest in a while.
Sure.
But before that, I don't think I asked you what you're doing for your major elements. Like, what's your supply for major elements?
Yeah. So I use ATI Essentials Pro.
Yeah.
So part 1 is alkalinity, and part 2 is calcium, magnesium, and then a bunch of trace elements.
Okay. Yeah, you did mention that you were dosing those. So
yep.
Yeah. Okay. So the ATI. Yeah.
And then I also do calc. So I have on all 3 of my systems, I have calc stirs, and I dose calc at night as a way to reduce the expense, really. It's mostly reducing the expense. It cuts my 2-part use by about probably 30 to 40% if I dose a lot of calc at night.
Yeah.
Because I have, let's see, 4 systems, and so it gets expensive after a while to buy a lot of 2-part.
I actually didn't realize you had so many systems, so maybe you can send me a few videos or pics of the other ones before I put this up.
Yeah.
Or at least maybe the Frag systems or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I have a couple Frag systems. Yeah. I have an anemone tank. That's 4. Yeah, 4 total. So cool. two Frags, an anemone tank, and then my display.
And those are all separate sets of water chemistry, or are some of them tied together?
All separate.
Yeah.
All separate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. I guess technically I have 5 separate systems because I've got 2 at a local fish store that I run. But Yeah,
Oh,
actually,
cool.
the store is actually for sale, so I don't know what's going to happen coming up here because I've got a
Oh, yeah.
400-gallon
Find a new location.
tank there. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to buy it. I don't want to be a fish store owner. I'm happy just growing coral
Yeah.
and running a home-based
Yeah.
business. But yeah. Ooh, my looks like my battery on my camera is going to die soon. Okay, let's get into rapid fire questions because this is always kind of fun.
All right.
It's also rarely
Yes.
rarely rapid, almost never rapid. Okay, so this one I've turned into a two-part question. So favorite fish and then favorite utility fish. Could be one in the same, but
Yeah, so it's hard for me to pick. I mean, one of the fish probably that got me into reefing was the Mandarin Dragonet.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I have that in my anemone tank, which is my softy and anemone tank. And yeah, I have to squint to see him because he's little, but
Yeah,
I love him.
yeah,
And then utility fish has got to be bristletooth tangs, man.
yeah. They're
Any
great.
bristletooth tang, they
Yeah,
just work rocks like
yeah,
nobody's business.
yeah. Those big lips and the kind of gnarly teeth.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're so good at getting algae off the rocks.
yeah. Totally. Yeah, they're great utility. Okay, favorite SPS. You can say a trade name of a coral or species, whatever.
Yeah, for the longest time, I probably would have said Oregon tort because, Portland is the
Yeah,
the
that's true.
origination site to upscale fish and reptiles in Portland is where the Oregon tort came from,
Hmm.
and that's one of the stores I like to visit, and I've kept Oregon tort for as long as I've had a reef tank. But recently, I've really gotten into pearlberry, though.
Mm,
The classic pearlberry. I
yeah,
mean, I like corals that you can see from across the room,
yeah,
and the pearlberry it just really strikes you.
yeah. When it shines right, it's really, really quite nice for sure. But
Yeah,
same with
that
the
light
Oregon tort,
blue.
you can see from across the room too.
Yep.
Yeah, both good choices. You can say both. That's fine if it's a tie.
Well, okay, both then.
LPS, I'm gonna guess Goniopora. Is there any, or would you
Yeah,
surprise me?
I'm gonna say Ghani, and I'm gonna say a particular Ghani. So, uh, you remember Reef Gen from the Long Island Aquarium, right? Reef Gen released Ghanis back when nobody was keeping Ghanis because nobody could keep them alive for very long.
Hmm.
And I have this coral's probably been aquaculture for like over 20 years.
Wow.
One they call Justin's Green Ghani,
Hmm.
and that thing grows like crazy. And I
Hmm.
can a big colony of that I'll frag like 4 or 5 times a year. It's crazy how fast it grows. I've spread that everywhere.
Hmm.
I love that, and it's a relatively common looking one, but it just gets so big and flowy and
And it's proven
has
itself
sometimes
in the aquarium hobby. You know.
it's proven itself.
Yeah.
And I can give people frags of it. I can give beginners frags of it that want Ghanis, and it tends to do well.
Hmm. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just looked it up here, and it just looks like a kind of a neon green Ghani, but yeah, I like the backstory for sure. That's cool.
Yeah, well, you'll see
Yeah.
it in my tank video. It's
Yeah.
the huge green Ghanis
Okay.
everywhere.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and then softy. I don't know if I saw any softies in the tank, but do you have any favorite types of softies?
Yeah, so in my other system where I have the anemones, I have a bunch of sarcophytans, and
Mm.
I think my new favorite is a Japanese Nephthia
Mm.
that is just really striking, really bright green with sort of purple polyps.
Cool.
It's a really nice one.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. The next question is favorite light and product, but it sounds like it's going to be those.
Refi Uno 2.0.
Yeah, totally. Okay, cool. That's an easy one. Okay, this one. Well, you seem to use a few different product lines. If you were to sort of use one product line for all of your water chemistry related needs, what would that be? If you had to pick one.
Probably would be Captivate
Yeah.
because they make a 1 and 2 part. Um, yeah, I would definitely go with Captivate. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the next question is favorite salt mix. We kind of talked about salts, but in your experience of salts you've tried over the years, what would you say was your favorite?
Well, I guess I also like the Tropic Marin salt.
Hmm.
So I I've used the most I've used probably is Red Sea Blue Bucket, Tropic Marin Pro, and Aqua Forest, and they've all been fairly consistent. So I guess I'm going to go with Aqua Forest based on price. It
Yeah.
tends to be the best, at
Hey,
least
price can be a
now.
factor. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that can totally be a factor. Okay, cool. Aquarium controller. Like, what do you use any controllers? Do you have a preference?
Yeah, so I have both GHL and Hydros on different systems, and I use them as monitors. I don't really have them control very much
Hmm.
because I don't like having things happen that I don't have direct control over, like people having their Trident dose or people having their Alcatronic dose. I've never
Yeah.
been very comfortable with that because things get a little bit off and then you end up with big problems. So I like both the Hydros and the GHL as a monitoring system.
Yeah, I would say I use more as monitoring systems, but I do have, power bars that are controlled for lights and heaters and stuff like that. So, but a lot of people say their favorite aquarium controller is themselves. So maybe you're more in that camp.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a little more complex than that because yeah, I mean I have my GHL and Hydros, turn on outlets and
Hmm.
things, but the more sophisticated decisions are done by me.
Yeah, 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 and I agree. I think aquarium controllers maybe are more primarily monitors than they are controllers a lot of the time. They're doing more just to monitor and to warn us if something like I know my calcium reactor or my CO2 is run out if my pH goes above whatever parameter I put in the alerts, right? So it'll let me know, and I'll have that
Yeah,
second canister hopefully ready to go and swap it out. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Alerts are really yeah.
yeah,
I have Alcatronics on my systems, and they have them send me alerts if either it gets too high or too low. I
yeah,
find that very helpful.
yeah. But you will not have it make an adjustment on its own based
I
on
will
that.
never have it
Yeah,
make an adjustment
I
on
agree.
those.
I will not do that either. Okay, wave pump. Would you have a favorite?
I mean, in terms of the the quality of the flow and stuff, I love the Ecotechs, but they've gotten ridiculously expensive. So an Ecotech MP40 right now is like
Yeah, it's
$470,
wild.
and I just got a DMP 40 for $170
Hmm.
that is doing a pretty darn good job on my tank.
What's the
So
DMP 40?
that's the J Bow one
Okay,
that
okay. Yeah,
copied their design.
because wasn't there like a patent thing for a long time, and then that time passed, and then they were able to kind of
No,
copy it.
there's still a patent. It's a patent
Okay.
violation.
Yeah, okay. They're just going for it. That's
But
funny. Crazy.
it's like how I can't afford to spend $470 on a single
It's too
wave pump per
much. I
month.
mean, how do
It's
people want to get into this hobby when they see the cost of ecotech stuff? And, it's like, oh,
yeah,
a lot of the best hobbyists use this stuff. It's like, really? Like, I mean, sure. Yeah, I think MP40s are great. I like Radions. I use them. I even get them at wholesale cost, and they're still expensive as hell. So
yes. Yeah,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Okay. All right. Well, that's cool. I'm curious how that pump sort of does over time. I know, like Leonardo's Reef, in Europe, he's all about Jabao, pumps and stuff, and they seem to work great for him. So,
Yeah, I mean, so for my return pumps for the last 5 years or so have been the Simplicity pumps
mhm,
that you basically it's basically a relatively inexpensive Chinese pump that has the brand Simplicity slapped on it,
mhm.
and they're inexpensive. And those things have been, I mean, based on what I can see, they're more reliable than some of the Neptune ones, or not the Neptune ones, the Vectra, I think is the name, the
Hmm.
Ecotech one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The Vectra, I've found the power supplies die on them quite at least almost once a year. So I've had bad
Yeah, I've
success
heard
with those.
stuff like that. I've
Yeah,
heard stuff like that. Man, I never have trouble with my Simplicity
yeah.
pumps. So
That's good to know. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what creates this perception of quality in products in the reefing hobby. You know what I mean? I feel like there's a like some products just get held at a higher level for whatever reason. I mean, sure, the eco stuff is made in the States, like, but they've moved their facility. They've seemed to have some manufacturing issues moving to the new facility. And nothing's perfect no matter where it's made. So I don't know why it is the way it is, but it's a good point to just give some of these cheaper products a try sometimes, and if they work, then share that information with other hobbyists. Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I've gotten an inexpensive filter roller, and it works. It's the best. It's the most valuable piece of equipment on my tank, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Cool. Okay. Let's skip to the next one. Most hated pest.
I'm going to say spionid worms in my Acropora, because they're so hard to get rid of. They're annelids that bore into your acros and your montes, and they stick their little two antennae out, and they cause the acro or the monte to be all deformed and grow around it. And I hate the way they look, and
they're very really strange. Do they reproduce in reef aquariums readily? Or
they must.
Yeah.
They must.
Yeah.
They spread like crazy.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to do a pest episode in pretty fine detail on all coral pests. So that'll be one that I'll have to do a bit more research on, but that's interesting.
I've done ivermectin dips of all my corals multiple times, and it's fairly effective at knocking them back, but it doesn't totally get rid of them. Mm-hmm. They still find a way to come back.
Yeah.
And so actually, I heard, Reynaldo Riverone of Pirates Reef and Chris Meckley talked about trying out this fenbendazole. Fenbendazole, Angels Plus. I think it's called dewormer flakes.
Yeah, they're using the dewormer flakes. I was actually the one that had mentioned fenbendazole to years ago, and then he thought of that flake thing and gave it a try. So it's interesting that low dose actually worked. But these spionoid worms could be sensitive to that medication as well.
Well, Chris says that it gets rid of spionids.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
So I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna be a little more scientific, and I'm going to weigh the flakes, and I'm going to try to be very, very precise about my dose and see what it does.
Yeah. It's an interesting kind of a bit of a, I don't know, a crapshoot of a dose. You're just kind of like going, oh, it's in the flakes. I don't know the concentration exactly, but
I mean, it's an anti-helminth medication, so and it's safe. It's safe for humans. It's it's not like you're throwing an antibiotic in your tank.
Yeah.
However, if you were to accidentally overdose and kill all of your bristleworms at once, what would that do? Mm-hmm. That would probably cause some problems.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful.
It's actually, I have seen a tank be overdosed, and I think actually the system can handle it. It's more just what is the aftermath of anything that dies off afterwards,
right?
Because snails are affected. You're going to lose some snails. And the snails eventually are going to rot and give you an ammonia spike and whatever other kind of nasty kind of things, happen from that. So, sometimes it's not the action, it's the reaction of a medication or something we use. It's the aftermath and how that is managed than it is the actual onset,
Yep.
Yeah. Okay,
totally
final question, the fun thought experiment question. So if you were in a position to set up a dream reef tank such as Andy Sandler's Polo Reef, what would you do, and what would you do differently from what he's done?
I would do Indonesian biotope and try to stick with all corals from the same region. I think that would be so cool to do.
Yeah, and just let them get massive. Just let a few of them get massive.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I am sort of a compulsive fragger, so I'd have a hard time stopping myself.
Yeah, and there are enough corals to get from Indo that you'd have no shortage. But yeah, I like the idea of a biotope, and there could be something to that in terms of all of those corals being synergetic with each other long term in a big system.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps it'd be interesting to see the microbiome.
Yeah, but
they're all corals from the same region.
But if you had the budget and if you had the means, you would do it. Am I guessing you would?
Wow, 17,000 gallons. I don't know if I would do that.
I mean, you got people you can pay to maintain it, though.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, it would be it'd be fun.
yeah.
Can we do a quick
Oh,
thing where I
yeah,
talk about
that's
the
right.
the
Yeah,
app of it? Yeah.
yeah. We're going to talk about the app. So, you mentioned to me that you are kind of working alongside some other people in developing this app that kind of brings all of our aquarium data kind of together into one
Yes.
place, which kind of makes it all make
Yes.
sense in relation. Yeah. So maybe
And it
explain that
connects
to
it.
me.
Yeah. And it connects it using AI. And so we're going to be able to bring together data on microbiome, data on eDNA, chemistry, ICP, your equipment, lighting and flow, lighting schedules, um, all the species of fish and invertebrates you keep in the tank, and connect that all in an app. And the app is called Reef Ability, and we hope to have it out by Christmas. And I think it's going to be a cool thing, especially in the long term, because we have all of these disparate sources of data where data are deposited. We have
Mm,
Aquabionics with microbiome data. We have ICP companies with the chemistry data. And this is going to bring them together.
mm,
And oh, the other thing I forgot is pest identification, where you can take a picture of the pest and it'll tell you
really?
what it is and provide some recommendations for what to do with it.
I'm really
I think it'll,
curious how this is all gonna, how the AI is gonna be able to analyze and sort of actually make Is it making suggestions based on
yeah,
all of the
it makes,
information?
yeah. So I actually, it was cool the other day. I I entered all the layout of my tank, which is this long tank, and I have wave makers on the two sides, and I have three islands. And the AI suggestion was that I should put a wave maker directed behind the center island because there could be a dead spot in flow there. And I thought, well, that's
Hmm.
a pretty good recommendation.
Yeah, yeah, that is fair. That's actually
So,
pretty good.
and the cool thing is that we've been talking about these pathogens. We've been talking about dissolved organic carbon data, and what this is it if enough people use the app, we'll have data from Aquabiomics, we'll have data from ICP, and then data on dissolved organic carbon, and we could potentially see our Vibrios more likely to cause issues in tanks that have DOC above 8 in an
Yeah,
ocean mode test, so something like that.
yeah.
Potentially can connect these disparate sources of data.
It's interesting because I also think, some of the explanations for these things vary from company to company. Like, Fauna Marine has explanations for what causes dinos or cyanobacteria, which, has to do with certain, well, nutrient ratios, but also some of the ratios of trace elements, So I would imagine this app is kind of being fed data from different sources to kind of make sense of it all, because there's
Yep.
there's conflicting things out there. It's like, for example, like, one company might say the potassium is responsible for your corals being blue, and one company might say it's responsible for the red pigments in your corals. You get these mixed data
Right.
points.
Right. Well, I mean, so my own experience with dissolved organic carbon is that when I lowered it, my cyanobacteria problems became less of an issue.
Hmm.
And so that's the kind of thing that the app would pick up on, right?
Yeah,
Because people report problems to the app, and then you also do an NDOC test or you do an SAC, whatever
yeah.
the
254.
whatever
Yeah.
the yeah, whatever they call the test for
Hmm.
in Oshimo or Fauna Marin, it can make those connections.
Yeah,
So I think that'll be potentially very useful.
yeah. That's
So I'm
cool.
excited about it.
Yeah, that's
It's a
awesome.
kind of a new thing for me to try, and it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited, and maybe we'll talk about it more once it's going. And will it be a phone app that people can just
Yeah, it's a phone app.
you know
Yep, it'll
yeah,
be on the available through iTunes or
cool.
through Google Play. Yep.
That's exciting. Cool. Okay. Well, we'll watch out for that, and if there's any links to anything that we can post to kind of give it a little people to have a look at what's going on with it, I'll put it in the chat. I'll even put it in the or I mean the description. I'll put it in the description down the road too. So if
awesome. Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, cool. All right, man. Well, yeah, listen, this has been a great chat. So let's keep in touch, and I'll probably reach out to Eli soon too, and try to fill in the rest of these pieces of the Aquabiomics puzzle. But it was nice to get caught up.
BC isn't so far away. I mean, you're part of the Pacific Northwest. You should come down here and visit
totally.
us.
I'd love to come down.
You got a great community here in Portland.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to go see Rudy too. And yeah, totally.
Oh man,
it's been some years since I've been down to Oregon, so maybe a road trip next summer or something like that would be super fun. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool, man. Okay, well, have a good night, and thanks for making some time, and happy reefing.
All right, thanks. You too, man.
Cheers, man. Okay, cheers. Bye. Thanks for joining me today with Dr. Andy Bouwma. If you want to get a little bit more information about Aquabiomics or maybe send in a sample, go to aquabionics.com. If you want to reach out to Andy for a question about Aquabiomics or your results, you can find him on Instagram as LexInverts. Make sure to check the description of this episode for links to any products or services discussed. Just another shout out to our sponsor, Fauna Marine. So many great products by this company. I use a lot of them in my systems. Otherwise, I wouldn't have them as a sponsor. Just a reminder that I am a certified ICP consultant for Fauna Marine. So if you want to have your results analyzed or just go over a general issue in your tank, you can go to my Patreon at patreon.com/BeyondTheReefPodcast. If you have any suggestions for future guests, want to ask me a question, or just reach out in general, you can email me at beyondthereefpod@gmail.com. And if you're looking for high-quality aquacultured corals in Canada, please go to my website at fraggarage.ca. Hope to hear from you soon.